All right. I want to welcome you today to our presentation. My name is Brent Johnstone. I'm a director of ICEAA Region 6. I want to welcome you to a joint presentation between by the ICEAA OEM COG organization and ICEAA Region 6. Our topic today is design to cost applied to a fictional product support center case study. That's a very fancy way of saying that our presenter today is going to walk us through a practical application of design to cost. Yeah, probably in your careers, you've probably seen presentations on DTC before. There's a tendency for them to be somewhat theoretical and philosophical. Today's presentation, I think you'll find, is a very practical application, and I think it will provide a very good example for people who are maybe struggling to understand how DTC gets applied in the real world. Our presenter today is John Deem. He is a business analyst for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics and has 30 years of experience in cost estimating, cost modeling, and affordability analysis for military aircraft. He's worked both the proposal side, the industry proposal side for Lockheed Martin and for its predecessor companies, as well as the government procurement side for NAVAIR. He's a longtime member of ICEAA and its predecessor organizations for over 30 years. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in industrial engineering from the University of Missouri in Colombia and a master's degree in business administration from Texas Christian University, which I will point out is now number 4 ranked in the country. So I'm sure you can ask John any questions you'd like about that. Also, John holds a CCEA certification. So without any delay, I'll hand it over to John and take it away.
All right, thanks, Brent. Thank you very much. CCEA is Certified Cost Estimator Analyst. Not a lot of those everywhere, so I think it's special. I'm proud of it, and I certainly promote people pursuing that and getting it. If you have any questions about that, please reach out. And just a correction on the bio, it's not actually NAVAIR, it's NAV Pro, which is basically what a DCMC is now. So don't want to mislead anybody to thinking, that might be attending from NAVAIR going, wait a minute, he didn't work for us. And that might be true, but it was the Navy. So that was correct. So I'm going to dig into this. Like Brent said, it's a fictional case. It is, of course, if you've been in the practice of applying design to cost, cases are vary quite a bit. So this isn't intended to be similar to all cases, but it's a case that kind of walks you through the methodology and gives you an idea of how to apply design to cost and some of the principles that are really important to doing it right. So I'm going to dig into this a little bit. Let's see, kind of what Brent already said, so I'm going to keep going through that. I do want to mention that I point out some commonality to cost estimating and analysis methods that are included in the ICEAA cost estimating body of knowledge. Concepts like target costing, reducing total ownership cost, activity-based costing, which are not designed to cost, but there are some commonalities that I think are worth pointing out. So I'll do that up front. So digging into this a little bit, I'm going to ask you, here's my agenda. I am going to start out with explaining to everybody online that I'm going to ask you to put yourself in the role of being assigned by your boss to this case study. I think you'll get more out of it if you follow along with that in mind. The product that our company, our fictional company, delivers is a product support center. Our fictional company is PSC Inc. Got a couple of definitions to go over to make sure we're all on the same page. They're just definitions for this exercise, not really something that might be more broad spread, but it might be helpful. Like I said, I'm going to leverage some of our body of knowledge from GAO also, along with the ICEAA body of knowledge topics, and go through the case study steps. It'll be like a live exercise from start to finish, and then we'll make some observations at the end. So your assignment, your management is asking you to do this. Step outside of your comfort zone, and I want this to be a good experience this time. I want it I don't want it to be too complicated. Don't get too tied up in the philosophy. And we don't want to spend more than we might possibly save. I know it's hard. Targets are hard. Suppliers are hard. Managing target allocations is hard. Just defining what we're talking about is hard. So with that, we're gonna kind of slug through some of those challenges and try to make it easy for us. I often get the question, could we meet our target without applying design to cost? Well, yeah, probably could hit it somehow, some way. But if you're dealing with a complex situation, it's typically easier to follow a systematic, disciplined approach, my opinion. So with that, let's dig in. You might recognize this if you're a ICEAA member. It comes from the cost estimating body of knowledge. The numbers on the screen are actually part of an activity-based cost example. And the challenge here is to take this starting point and create a design to cost example from just what you see on the screen. And that is where I started on this exercise. I decided that these costs kind of looked like it might be some kind of product support center. It doesn't define what the product support center is. That's not important. You can assume it might support airplanes or boats or tanks or vehicles or really any kind of product that you might envision delivering to a customer. So we're not going to define what product this is, except that it is a product support center. Definitions. Design to cost, in my mind, is an exercise, an application, a methodology where your design decisions are informed by cost analysis. Affordability is a little bit broader definition, which would encompass design to cost, and that is where your product offering decisions are also informed by cost analysis. And then collectively, we use the term design to cost affordability to talk about all of it together. There we go. And then before we really dig in and start looking deeper into our case, it's really important to understand for a specific opportunity or a program or a project where it might fall on the best value spectrum. This pictorial comes from GAO. I added a few notes to it, of course, but it's really hard to do design to cost if you don't know how important cost is versus your performance or your non-cost factors. So you got to kind of decide where you are and then you design your design to cost application around that, whether it's low price technically acceptable at the left end of the spectrum to it's all about performance at the right side where cost doesn't even matter, and then everything in between. Then stepping into some of the cost estimating body of knowledge, target cost is not design to cost. It's not the same thing, but there's a lot of commonality. Both design to cost and target cost are much more successful if you consider the voice of the customer from the beginning of your initiative, your efforts to completion. That's represented by the bar across the top. You look at the bar across the bottom, including your extended enterprise in your efforts is also a critical approach, whether it's target cost or design to cost. And that would be your suppliers and your partners and your teammates and everybody that might fall into that category. Starting with the gray boxes on your left, you do the market research, your assessment of your competition. You work with your financial teams and come up with a profit strategy along with your executives. You do that up front to figure out where your costs need to be. And then you establish targets, very similar to how you would in a design to cost application. You go through your design process into fielding your product and supporting it in the field. So very similar to design to cost. Also, another concept is RTOC, reducing total ownership cost, also covered in the cost estimating body of knowledge. It's not DTC, but it provides some good, there's a lot of commonalities, like starting out with a technical baseline and cost baseline, doing a cost driver analysis, setting cost reduction targets, developing a list of initiatives that are going to help you meet your target. The thing that's different about our talk is it really focuses on lifecycle cost, including your development, acquisition, and your operations. Moving on to the next concept I'd like to highlight is activity-based costing, ABC, or ABM, activity-based management. It kind of came to light in the early 1990s timeframe, I believe. But what I like about that, and like I said, this is where we started with the data. It focuses on your resources and what those resources actually do. So philosophically, this is interesting. As you remember, we talked about the nouns and the verbs earlier. And what I found in looking at this as a data analysis is it's really nice to have a view that shows both at the same time. It gives you the cost visibility. It's really helpful for something like a design to cost application. All right, with that background, I'm gonna say with any project you undertake, it's really a good project management discipline to start with a charter, a problem statement, a situation assessment. So here is the brief charter for this case that we're going to go through today. Our company, Product Support Centers, Inc., sets up and runs product support centers for our customers. We're about to get an RFP for a quantity of 6 centers. They'll deliver in 12 months, 3 months apart, and we know the customers typically value performance more than cost at a ratio of something like 70-30. It's a competitive market where we've got a Acme product support centers that's really good, and we really need to sharpen our pencil here. We have a market analysis, we have an initial estimate. So the scope of the opportunity is to set up 6 turnkey centers and then include 4 years of operating cost. Things like enterprise IT hardware, software, facilities, we found are handled at a higher level in this, and this team is only going to look at a narrow scope. Objectives to develop an offering with competitive cost performance balance, and the specific target objective is the initial setup cost for this phase 1 of this design to cost application. And for today, we're not going to look at the operating cost. We're going to defer that to a later phase. So that's, and your charters don't have to look like this. The point is to have a charter. And also the point of plan is to have a plan. Your plan doesn't have to look like this. This is very simple and elementary, but the point is have a plan, make sure your team is all on the same page. I suggest a certified lead. ICEAA should do fine, but they're supported by a network of experts generally. We'll put a lead, you know, your plan will define how you organize your teams to go attack your DTC application. In this case, we have leads responsible for each acquisition activity, deputies for each noun within their activity, and as we go, we may adjust our plan, of course. Description of the process. Describe your process of how you're going to implement your design to cost method for a specific application. Tailor it as appropriate for a given opportunity. Develop a profit strategy. Review your market analysis. I like starting with a peanut butter challenge, but that's only to understand your cost better. If you try to implement with a peanut butter challenge, I'm guessing that's not really going to work very well. A lot of times it's too hard to develop a more detailed challenge, but we'll look at that in a minute. I suggest really taking a closer look at each of your activities. Refine your challenge, allocate targets, make sure you have reserves, engage your suppliers, apply lean tools, challenge the requirements that might drive your costs unnecessarily. And then target management and reallocation of targets is part of the method. Certainly tracking progress to completion is a hallmark of design to cost. Tools, we'll do a cost driver analysis, look at support cost ratios, we'll do some brainstorming with lean and agile techniques. Moving on, let's start to look at the data for this case, team. This shows the activities, the verbs, first step we had to do was split it into initial acquisition costs and operations costs. We're going to focus on the initial setup cost for this phase one exercise. Had to assume economics because they weren't defined up front. FY $23 should work for today. And our initial estimate for acquisition is $13.8 million. I left everything in whole numbers because that's what I started with. Okay, moving on. And here's what I like about the activity-based costing. It shows how the cost visibility you get by looking at the activity view, which are verbs, which condoned by activity-based costing, but retaining your nouns and how they rack and stack. Looking into the data to start with, we found it necessary to revise our organization plan and the scope of our charter, all good things. But while we have this up, we took an opportunity to look at the support costs. They look pretty reasonable. The ratios for things like TDY, supplies, miscellaneous equipment, all look pretty insignificant. Probably not worth spending a whole lot of time on. We might put a intern on that or something, but 0.6%, 0.1%, 0.1% for your support costs. If something was like 20 or 30 or 45% or something outrageous, we might have a bigger team on it. The point is, look at your costs, your support costs. Keep on rolling here. This chart here is not an initial profit strategy, but it looks at our profit strategy and then how it evolves over the course of the project rather than coming back to it. So here's our 13.9 million, our initial estimate, cost estimate. Assumed a nominal profit of 10%, gives us a nominal price on the order of 15.2 million. Our market research says it's really got to be in the order of 13.7 million. With a 10% fee assumed, that would give us a cost target of 12.5, about a 10% challenge. Our strategy department said we should look at maybe getting more customers if we could reach a price target of 20%. Just to report, our teams looked at that and really found it not to be realistic or not achievable. So between 10 and 20%, just reporting how things turned out, we found in our design to cost efforts that we were able to achieve a cost estimate of about 11.6 million. And working with our executives to drive expand margin down the road to 15%, we developed ideas and thoughts on how to do that. So just illustrating how profit strategy factors into a design to cost exercise. Certainly, there's a lot of ways to look at that. That was just a totally fictional example. I hope you liked it. Here's a Pareto analysis. We use those commonly in the cost estimating field. Rank the costs from top to bottom. I highlighted the top three costs and the mid-tier costs and of course our support costs. And we're looking at this to identify how we might deploy our resources so we get a good return on our investment. And we'll update our plan as we see fit. Taking that to the next step of the process, here's the notional targets. So peanut butter approach, just to see what it looks like, try it on. And our goalposts are between 10 to 20%. What we found to be achievable at 16% was in the middle, but again, these were just notional. So taking that a step deeper, we analyzed the cost drivers, the requirements that drove costs, the elasticity of a cost estimate. You need to know if you're going to go give somebody a target. If the cost is already pretty well fixed and immovable, you can give them whatever target they want. They're going to come back with the cost as it is. Some costs have more opportunity than others. The idea here is to dig down into each of these cost elements, each of these activities, and figure out how much opportunity might there be, set achievable but challenging targets, and then start your efforts. Dig in. So consider the characteristics of each individual activity when you allocate your targets. All right, then we Go on to the next step and apply some value engineering techniques, like quality function deployment. Only include features in your offering that customers are willing to pay for. Apply lean methods and other tools, of course, depending on the appropriate, how appropriate they are for the product that you're designing and delivering. Challenge requirements that drive costs unnecessarily. Basically, apply value engineering methods to inform your product offering and your design decisions. So how does that turn out? Target tracking over time, down the left here, sorry about the small numbers, but the idea here is we did a report with our starting point at $3.9 million cost, our target of $12.5 million at cost. Our 11.1 was not achievable, and where we ended up was at 11.6. And how we did that in this case, this fictional case, is we optimized our workstation and network comms purchasing in the near term, and we included a forecast of needs with long-term agreements with our suppliers. That's an example. We looked at our software cost, which was one of the higher costs, and we found that the license costs and expenses in some cases were specific to premium customer performance requirements, and they were burdening our cost of our product to our standard product support center customers. That gave us the idea to optimize our personnel expertise, which our personnel expenses was another significant cost, and deploy costs in an optimal manner between our standard offering and our premium offerings. Then of course, we segmented customers into standard and premium performance requirements and developed an initiatives roadmap to achieve our long-term margin growth objectives. Certainly, every case is going to be different. The value engineering and the tools that you apply are going to be different. This is simply really just to illustrate design to cost applications. So moving on, what else did we run into? Target cost management involves reallocating target reserves, and as realities unfold. Things might happen like the market conditions change. It doesn't help you to pursue a target that's no longer relevant or obsolete, so you may have to update your target. One activity might exceed its reduction and be able to contribute back to the target reserves. Another activity just couldn't get to its target and would need to tap into the reserves. So managing reserves is part of design to cost. And then I think we achieve our results, our ideal results. Yes, so when we're done, we want to report things like, hey, we managed a charter and our plan. We revised and updated them over the course of the project, and that really worked well for us, project management discipline. Our external target price was revised and updated as conditions changed. Our profit strategy was achieved, and it looks good for the future. Targets were challenging, but realistic. The teams appreciated that. Our value engineering efforts were appropriately scaled and effective, so we got a good return on our investment for our design to cost application. Design decisions and product offering decisions were informed by good, solid cost analyses by certified cost estimator analysts. We tracked our progress, and we managed our targets. We used processes that helped us achieve our results, and that's just our fictional case, what good results might look like. So that's most of it today. Just kind of a review of the steps that we took. We had a charter, we had a plan, we had an external target price, we had a profit strategy, we developed a baseline starting point, we managed we allocated targets in a intelligent and informed way. We applied value engineering methods to achieve our targets. We tracked our progress over time. We reallocated and managed our targets as we got closer to achieving our results. And I kind of gave you what would be a nice fictional, what your results might look like, what you'd like them to look like. And of course, we were able to sell our products and be successful. And that's just a quick, simple, concise description of what a DTC application might entail. I'm going to go on here and look at, let's see, observations that I made along the way. These are things I like about what we just did. design to cost is design decisions informed by a cost analysis. How do you explain design to cost to somebody? I think simplistically, that's pretty good for an elevator discussion. Affordability analysis. We have in the past spent many, many hours trying to define affordability, and I've seen many presentations on it, but I think if you inform your product and service offerings using making decisions informed by cost analysis, that works for a cost analyst. Certification is a great thing. Leveraging your body of knowledge and best practices is a good thing. Knowing where you fall on the best value spectrum is critical for how you approach implementing design to cost. Target cost and design to cost are not the same thing. RTOC is not the same thing. Activity-based cost is not the same thing, but there's a lot of commonality, a lot of elements and characteristics that are pretty useful and actually essential towards successful design to cost application. Having a charter is just good project management discipline, along with having a documented plan that you update as you go and keep the team focused. Upper management especially appreciates that design to cost can be an effective approach for margin expansion. Of course, get your finance people to figure out how to do that in different strategies. Certainly, anything we do, you keep your return on investment in mind. If you're going to spend money on a project, make sure it pays off. Don't spend more than you're going to save. I like the quick notional look for allocating targets, and then digging deeper into each actual activity to develop targets that make sense. Target management is classic design to cost methodology, and I think I made it look easy today. I think it didn't get too bogged down in the philosophy, and I had fun with that. But I'm interested in observations others might make. What maybe a bullet that stood out to you that you liked, that you weren't aware of, or interested in feedback on. And did I miss something here that's really important you want to share with the group? But looking to everybody online to kind of weigh in with in the chat to see what you have to say. But other than that, that's pretty much what I have to offer you today. What do you think, Brent? Did anything jump out to you?
Okay, so we got a question from the audience. So one of the questions is, maybe I missed it, but did you say what your starting point was? Were you working from an initial estimate from a proposal? So what was your starting point, John, in your fictional example?
It was an estimate. It was an initial estimate. I'm not sure how to explain what more that might have been, but it was an initial estimate, certainly developed from the CBOC activity-based costing example and data, and that's what we started with. So I would say it was an early ROM estimate of a future offering. I hope that makes sense, but
so let me kind of follow up on that as far as when DTC gets inserted into the process. So in your fictional example, it's a competition, right? So yes. I would assume that you would want the DTC to inform what your actual submittal is going to be, right?
Right.
So you said an initial estimate, so that's not necessarily one that goes to the customer, right? That's an internal estimate.
Internal estimate, right.
Right.
And in this case, I think we said it was pre-RFP release, so a RFP was impending. So it was a pre-RFP scenario, which, actual DTC cases can vary all over the place as far as where they are in the life cycle, in a new product development or a derivative product, or probably anything really of where we are and where we need to be. So that's just part of the situation assessment. You would document where you were and what you had in hand. So I don't think the details of my specific case matter a whole lot, other than providing a illustration of how you would implement design to cost for any given situation. So whether it was pre-RFP or after you received an RFP, you would define that in your situation and your plan and go forward.
Do you have an opinion on what is the most effective case? I mean, the earlier the better, or
Well, yeah, we always say early is better. I don't think any presentations on design cost fail to mention it's better to start early. The challenge there is starting early is hard because might be in a conceptual phase, or you need people that can think conceptually, or you need cost models that can support conceptual design decisions. So starting early is absolutely better than starting later, because you can, look at an analysis of alternatives and alternate architectures, and you have a lot more options at your disposal to do. But a lot of engineers, the wheels would come off and go, well, I don't know what the requirements are yet. I can't start to turn on my brain. But so it takes a different mentality to start early in the conceptual phase, I believe, and that is hard.
okay. All right, so we got a few more questions here. So next question is, where in a DTC analysis would you address escalation for inflation?
That's a good question. Escalation for inflation could be done anywhere. It depends what you want to look at and how. I mean, certainly a certified estimator would know how to handle escalation for any angle executive or somebody might request. I think
would you want to do, I mean, in your example, you did it in constant year dollars. Is that the preferred methodology for developing a DTC? Or are there situations where you wouldn't want to do that?
No, I don't think. I think in this case it was arbitrary. I don't think it matters. I think getting bogged down in escalation during the design process might not have any benefit. But certainly if you're recording progress, you would want to be able to answer questions in whatever economics an audience might need, or an application. I mean, I think we pretty well in the cost estimating community know that we need to be able to do escalation gymnastics depending on the audience and the requester.
All right, so the next question we have goes to what I thought was one of the more unique things that you showed, and that is to think about nouns versus verbs, or to think about, I guess I think about nouns as being like a functional organization, and the verbs being, hey, this is what this group group does. So the question from the audience is, how common is it in our world to have access to cost data both as a noun and a verb?
Right,
the comments
right.
made that you don't typically do activity-based accounting. So how do you work around that?
That's a good one, because you're right. We typically have accounting systems that capture the cost of nouns, and in explaining to a customer what he's going to get and why it costs what it costs, customer typically only wants to know what the verbs are, and that's not typical. So you know as well as I do, the ability to slice and dice your data for the needs of your audience is important, and that's basically what I liked about the nouns versus verb view, which was not an original idea of mine. It really came from the activity-based costing example that said, hey, we analyze nouns versus verbs, and verbs are preferred. But I liked being able to slice it both ways because it gave me the visibility I needed to understand what it was I was looking at. So slicing and dicing to the preferences of your audience is certainly a skill to have, and the ability to do that. It always has been, and customers certainly would like to see the activity of the verb view, the activity view, because they know what they're getting in the output, or how the output price, the final bottom line price, breaks down.
But in
So,
terms of getting approval internally, I mean, you've got to work from the noun end, right? Because those organizations own those targets, right? So, you
right.
know, to some degree, that's the other view. You've got to sell it internally, and then to your point, you got to sell it externally as well. It's a little bit different audience.
Yes,
Um,
that's a good challenge, and I prefer, like I said, I prefer the slicing and dicing with the visibility if you can get it, and it's not always what we have.
um, Karen Marika sends a note. She wanted us to put a little plug, and we'll do that here for the Southern California chapter is doing a DTC overview course that's currently being developed. She says that it's a DTC with lessons learned as opposed to, you know, a how-to implementation. So a little bit different angle than what we see today. They're going to present it at their face-to-face chapter workshop on the 30th, but they're going to have a Zoom option. So just for the audience, if you're interested, you're intrigued, you want to learn some more, then I would certainly, you know, talk to Karen or other people at the Southern California chapter. I'm sure it'll be advertised, so you might want to check in there. So another question. So question about John, can you use the DTC model for a one-off project when you're bidding a space program? It's a space program that when completed may be used by multiple customers. What about a situation like that?
I think if, you know, I don't know the details of the specific project, but see, a one-off project that may be used by multiple customers. So yeah, so you would want to develop a product at a cost that was potentially marketable later. I think it's not the DTC model, but it's the DTC method. I think it's a matter of experimenting with that and trying it out. I don't have enough experience to say for sure on that. I'm actually consider myself a student of design to cost more so than an expert. I have done it a couple times. I mostly have read about it. So I would say that you could probably apply the method to anything as long as you scaled it, as long as you defined your objectives and your charter and applied the method systematically. I think that would work for that. I don't see why it wouldn't. And I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I certainly encourage you to try it, but try it on a small scale. And you know, it's really about your objectives you're trying to accomplish. Design to cost is just a tool, really. It's a process. You have objectives you want to go accomplish, and if you can accomplish those objectives with this tool, and if you can tailor the tool to accomplish your objectives, that's really the important thing, right? Does that sound good, Brent?
Sounds good to me. All right, next question. So can you outline how top-level target costs are established? I assume it's a market-based analysis, but are there any keys to that process?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I don't have anything prepared on how to develop a product market analysis. Keys to that process, I don't know what the keys would be, other than I think just thinking out loud. Generically, you might want to think about, and I'm reaching back to my marketing strategy course at TCU, where you have to understand your customer base and the other product offerings that might be available, and look at from a customer's perspective what they value in those products and what alternatives they have available to meet whatever needs or objectives they might have. But I would you know, given that thought that it really starts with marketing strategy, I would consult with your marketing strategy experts or people who have that kind of background and training in your company. And they probably are already doing things that are pertinent to your business and product lines, or certainly somebody's thinking about that in a forward-looking way. You know, what's the horizon look like? What does our customers look like? What do our markets look like? Where does our company want to be which really is probably additional strategic thinkers. I don't know how to explain it other than that generically, because that would apply differently probably to everybody online. But like I said, the first thing came to mind was my marketing strategy class from TCU.
But there might be cases where the customer just flat out tells you, hey, this is what I want it to cost, right? I mean, there are some cases where they may dictate it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Where you want to be for a design to cost application could absolutely be based on an analysis of customer funding available, budget analysis. Absolutely. Yep. That would be another, that's a good point. I agree with that.
Okay. Next question is, can you share any lessons learned on F-35 affordability strategies or implementation over the last 20 years?
Lessons learned. I think, I really think some of the things that are pointed out stem from lessons learned. Having a good project plan, the way targets are allocated, engagement of suppliers, including how targets are allocated to suppliers. Certainly not a peanut butter approach, but more of a exploratory understanding the nature of costs, whether they're relatively fixed or there's room to move if you have maybe some cost levers available, like I identified in the example. Certainly an excellent, well thought out trade study process, supported by an excellent lean process, challenging requirements that unnecessarily drive cost. All those things I think are applicable, pertinent lessons learned that really would apply to our historical programs or future programs pretty well. So I think how I would answer that question, I think I pretty well covered in the details if you want to go back through it. But I would say that is really the observations made in this fictional example are based on a lot of lessons learned.
So having worked F-35 for the last 25 years, I'll jump on that and say, to your point about working with suppliers, I think, and F-35 in particular, it's 70% of the procurement cost. It comes from the supplier side. You got to get buy-in from the suppliers. I mean, you can issue targets all day long, and if they don't buy into it, you're not going to get anywhere, right? And to your point about not taking a peanut butter approach, I mean, you can walk in there and say everybody's got to take off 10%, and that may just not be possible. And at the same time, you may be losing opportunities because another guy may be able to take 15 or 20% out, and you're letting him off easy by just saying, "Oh, you got to just take out 10." So, just kind of.
And I think, I think absolutely. I think it is 100% true that 10% for everybody is not the right answer.
Let me throw in a question here, and one thing that you kind of didn't talk about was, so you talked about establishing the initial target, and you talked about the process of doing trade studies. So the DTC is kind of an ongoing process during the design, right? I mean, you can establish a target up front, and how do you go track your performance of that target? How does that, so you've set a target, you've moved into preliminary design, you're moving into detailed design. What do you think the best ways are to track that performance? And the second question is, what do you do when you start overrunning it?
Well, I would say that that process is probably not very mature and not very well known, and we don't have a lot to go on about it. But I would say that's not entirely true either, because I would say if you took any expert earned value management analyst, you could take an earned value management system and turn it upside down and populate it with your data and track it over time. And it would be very similar to earned value management, just applied in a different way with targets and scenarios and project versions, and even in an earned value management function, you do have resetting your baseline and changing your baseline and changing your schedule and updating your ground rules for earned value management. So I would say an earned value management expert could probably step in and go, yeah, this is like earned value management, except it's a little bit quirky. So I think that's a simple answer. And I would think that potentially even, I've always wondered if you could take an earned value management COTS software and say, could you tweak this to give me design to cost functionality? I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly an interesting question.
So you talked about earlier, you talked about target reserves. So if you think about that in the context of management reserve in an EV system, there's, you obviously don't want to give up all of those reserves the first time somebody runs into trouble, right? I mean, the reserve implies just that you're holding it back for necessary occasions. So I guess that's part of it too, is that you can't burn through all of that reserve target in 6 months, and then you have nothing left for the other 3 years of the program, right?
Right.
So,
the analogy to earned value management, I think, is absolutely a great analogy. You can't burn through your management reserve managing a program either. I don't know about the gold card if it would apply, but that's an interesting thing to look at. Also, we might have to have a team look at, could you apply earned value management principles to design to cost? I don't know the answer to that, but if we looked at it, we might have some interesting findings.
So we didn't talk about trade studies. That's kind of almost its own topic of conversation, but how do you see the trade study process working? How do you see trade studies and design to cost process? How do they work together?
Well, the main thing you want to do is you don't want your design engineers to make a decision oblivious of cost that drives your costs up outrageously when it wasn't necessary to make that design change or go down that path. So if you're informing your design decisions with potential cost impacts, you can definitely flag design paths that you don't want to take that are really contrary to ending up at a place where you can't, which is undesirable. Design engineers certainly have the challenge of coming up with something that works, but it's not at all costs, unless you're at the right side of the best value spectrum. If you're at the low price technically acceptable, your design decisions absolutely have to consider cost, and cost is one of the most important things. You can't be adding products or characteristics or features to your product that customers aren't willing to pay for. So you got to look at the best value spectrum where you're at for the specific case that you're looking at, and your design decisions need to take cost into consideration to the extent appropriate for that the situation that you're in. So
related to that is the whole issue that at least aircraft problems run into from a weight perspective. That the plane's overweight, right? Oh my gosh, we've got to do something to reduce the weight because it's too heavy. It's going to cut the performance. So there's that tension there, right? So between weight and cost. So that kind of falls into what you're saying about you've got to balance off the elements. How important is cost versus performance versus what the customer wants? You've got to balance all those things together, right?
Right, absolutely. So I think I'm trying to think of anywhere in our body of knowledge where we address that. And I think in module 16, in the cost management module, there are some tools. I'm not expert at them, but basically that look at the exchange rate. And I believe it's ISO curves. It's under the CAVE subject matter, and in that subject matter it talks about exchange rates. So you have to develop, how much am I willing to trade cost for performance in a given situation, because in another situation, that trade-off would be different. So you have to model, and I can't say I'm an expert at that, but I have, in trade studies, we have developed exchange rates for cost versus performance, exchanges in decision making, and that's pretty well established in our body of knowledge. Might be worth back and revisiting that, or others resources or references that those exchange rates are based on. But rather than try to explain that, not really being an expert, I would point to that as a place to look for understanding that better. But absolutely, we might have run into cost versus weight challenges in the past and used exchange rates for cost versus weight quite a bit. And that is certainly something you encounter, I'm sure, I hear in rotary craft, and also with military aircraft for sure. So certainly comes up, and you certainly have to be aware of that. And basically, you don't want to make decisions that extraordinarily drive up your cost to make a minuscule weight savings, or a minuscule performance improvement that you might think is a good thing. If the cost is marginal, then that might be fair. If it's exorbitant, then there's certainly a red flag, and your teams would have to establish what's good versus what's okay versus what's not okay, and that would be, again, specific to any given situation.
Okay. Finally, we got a comment from the audience. The point of trade studies is a great complement to the idea of having functional constraints. If you've won a contract or you're bidding on a contract, there's likely to be functional requirements that your product or service must achieve. The functional requirements often bind you to certain costs.
Yep. Fact of life. You got to meet the requirements. I think the trade studies, though, are how do you meet the requirements? So how flexible is the situation? I mean, some situations are very fixed and there's not much you can do about it. Others, there might be some opportunity to look at different ways to achieve that same functionality, of course.
Right.
That's philosophically speaking.
But it goes back to the idea of the earlier you can start having those conversations, the better. I mean, I think we've all seen the charts where, by the time you get out of conceptual design, you've already locked in 60 to 70% of the lifetime cost of the product, right? I mean, and that's before you've really done hardly anything from a tangible design. Certainly from a build perspective, you've done nothing. So, but you've already got that large element of cost already locked in. So if you don't have something, you don't have a robust trade study process or affordability process or DTC, if you're not doing something to go look at that, you're going to wake up and go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? Right.
Right. And I could have easily included that part of the body of knowledge in here in the starting point also. That's certainly applicable, and it certainly is covered in the cost estimating body of knowledge. So appreciate you referencing that more, because it really does cover a lot of the best practices. It's just a matter of how do we build on our body of knowledge, and where do we starting with, and what else do we need to know, and what else do we need to learn about and share with each other.
All right, I think we are coming very close to the hour here. If there's any last questions that anyone has, please put it in the chat. I'll just kind of make a few closing. John, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make before we end today?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to share this idea that I came up with, which I thought was kind of harebrained when I started, and then the more I dug into it, I felt like this is something that might be valuable to other people, and I appreciate any feedback that anybody might have about the value they see in it, or if they liked it or not. And I guess really the only opportunity is to drop a note in the chat, but I hope everybody enjoyed that, and I hope it was valuable. And and certainly looking forward to building upon it and seeing what we can do next.
All right. Last comments that I'll make is I want to thank everybody for attending today, whether you came in under the auspices of the OEM COG, which is an organization, a subgroup within ICEAA that addresses the industry concerns of the of our business, or if you came in under Region 6, which is the Texas and the immediately surrounding states. Or if you're not a member of either one of those. Thank you for coming today, John. Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was very interesting. I felt like I learned a lot, and I hope our audience feels the same way. So
yeah, I hope everybody has a good night's sleep tonight and can sleep on this and really have some great ideas that come forward going forward.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.